other side. But the reality of the market is that there's really never enough time to understand your business partner. This is something a businessman wrote to me in an email. Long-term relations don't exist in the real world. It's about money and profit, pure and simple. Now, if that is true, then the whole idea of trying to make allowances for other people's cultures and the way they build relationships as opposed to the way our culture builds relationships becomes questionable. Here's another one which is related to this. Teams, and these are sales teams, are changing so fast with companies. And this is often done as a strategy. It's done on purpose so that the people involved don't build up these personal relationships. Now, this creates incredible amount of pressure. Companies, from company perspective, they say, we don't want these people to get to know and love each other, because if they do, then the contracts won't be as hard and as tight as they might be, or the deals. But on the other side, it's still people relating with other people. So that's some of the perspectives we've looked at. We've looked at some of the quotes from different companies and a couple of perspectives from the theoretical side, interdiscursivity from Bhatia, and I'd now like to move on to talking about training activities. Now, none of this is going to be new to you if you are teachers, but they are perhaps new ideas which you can use into your own, bring into your own training. Discussions, cognitive discussions, particularly, are very important part of building people's knowledge, skills, and attitudes when we talk about intercultural communication training. Here we could do things like have discussions from a simply, let's discuss what a contract is, let's define a contract, and you can do that in a classroom and you can discuss it for 45 minutes, particularly if there are people from other perspectives or who have come in from outside. You can also use the perspectives which we've just been looking at, those quotations. You can easily put those in front of a class and use those as a trigger to discuss. I rather like anecdote circles. Now, anecdote circles, and I'll give you the reference at the end of the talk, anecdote circles are another form of discussion, but whereas discussions tend to be more rational and focused on the issues, anecdote circles are designed to try and draw out an emotional aspect. I'll give you an example. What you do in a small group, for example, is sit everybody around in a circle, and as the moderator, you ask very few questions, but you prompt discussion. So you might ask an open question like, what happened at your last meeting with XYZ company? Or think about your last contract. How did you feel? And it's these words like think about and feel and what happened, which are designed to bring out an emotional response and therefore a slightly different aspect, a slightly different perspective. Critical incidents are really a development of the last two. What we're talking about here is using our students' experience and trying to formulate situations which they might come across in the real world, or which have their colleagues, etc., have come across in the real world. So critical incidents ideally are designed for your students in their particular context they're working in. A typical one would be something like company A wants to do business with company B, and they share some information and they decide that there is potential to do business, and they sign a letter of intent, which includes a confidentiality clause. And then the first company then goes off and meets another company to discuss perhaps some other project, and finds out that that other company has heard about their original negotiation with company B. In other words, company B has passed on the information, even though they signed a confidentiality clause. Now, that's the sort of thing which might happen in real life, and there's no right or wrong answer. What we're trying to do here is get students, get our people to discuss these situations and try and work out what they might do in the situation. And of course, we all, as business English trainers, know and love role plays and simulations. They're the bread and butter of what we do, particularly in companies. Role plays are when we give people roles, so they're not playing themselves. Simulations, obviously, are taking it one step further because we're simulating their real jobs and what they do in real life. And taken in a company context, simulations are looking at preparing for a negotiation. If you speak to people in a company who are off to do a negotiation for a contract, you very often find that they plan who's going to say what, sitting in the car or in the airport on the way to the meeting. And one thing we can do in our English training is to allow them, if you can get all the people in the team together, to come together and rehearse in the safe environment of a classroom and plan out their strategy and then simulate what their negotiations are going to be. But I'd like to take you into one role play, which I enjoy doing, and it's using loop input. Tessa Woodward produced this or brought forward this concept a few years ago, and I'm sure most of us know it. But just to recap, loop input activities are where you use an activity and the content of the activity is the thing you are using. I'll give you an example because it's very difficult to explain. For example, say I was teaching a bunch of teachers about listening activities, and a loop input listening activity would be having the teachers doing a listening activity, and the content of listening activity would be about listening activities, if you see what I mean. Now, we can do this with contracts as well, of course. We can have a negotiation where we divide the class into 2 or more teams, depending on how many people we've got. We can give them a perspective about contracts, which we've just been talking about, and there's several perspectives I've offered you. And then ask them to negotiate a framework for dealing with contracts. In other words, the role play aim is to negotiate how to handle contracts. So you have on one side, you have people who say, well, paper and details are important. And on the other side, you have people who say paper and people are important. And the idea is that in the classroom, we can negotiate this and people get to see and feel the other side's perspective far more than just talking about it or reading an article about it. So this is much more experiential. Okay, that's all I want to cover. We've looked at perspectives. We've looked at very briefly at some training activities which you might be able to adapt in the classroom. Very happy to discuss this later on. And here is a list of references if you'd like to follow it up. The anecdote circles, if you haven't come across it, this website is absolutely superb. It's got some very good tips on using storytelling and the power of storytelling within in companies and in the classroom. And there's the Batya. The Frendo book there is Working in Asia, which I wrote, or which was published this year, and is full of critical incidents for Germans working in an Asian context. And then there's the Gotti article and Woodward. Thank you very much.